Happy New Year!
Would you like to save yourself 12 minutes per week of listening to ads like this?
Well, Club Retrospectors members get an ad-free feed on their podcast app, plus weekly bonus bits and freshly baked episodes every Sunday.
And right now, you can try being a member for free. Visit patreon.com/retrospectors for a week's free trial. Or click subscribe on Apple Podcasts for a 14-day free trial.
That's patreon.com/retrospectors or click subscribe in Apple Podcasts.
And hurry, because the offer ends January the 18th.
It's January 7th, 1927, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
So it's today in history in 1927 that a soon-to-be global basketball phenomenon arrived in the tiny Illinois farm town of Hinckley, which would never before have seen an all-black team, let alone the one that would become the Harlem Globetrotters. And while they are said to have lost that debut match 43-34, the squad earned enough money to keep moving, first towards the Midwest, then the nation, and eventually the world.
Yeah, the players, to give them their due, were Walter Toots Wright, Byron Fat Long, William Kid Oliver, Albert Runt Pullins, and Andy Washington. Andy, no fun middle name for me, Washington. But to some extent, despite the fact they were pioneers, as you say, as African Americans playing a basketball game in an all-black team, in a way, more importantly than them was their manager, who'd put them together, Abe Saperstein, who isn't a black man and isn't from Harlem. I mean, the most interesting thing about this story for me is they're not from Harlem, they're from Chicago. They don't actually tour the world for more than 20 years into their story. And they weren't founded by a black American, but a Jewish guy from London.
Yeah, he was the son of Polish Jewish immigrants who had moved to London's East End, which is where Saperstein was born, and then on to Chicago. And growing up, he was obsessed with sport, particularly basketball, which had only been invented about 10 years before he was born. And he knew that he wasn't tall enough or talented enough to go pro, but his family weren't very well off and he needed to get a job. So he had already formed, and I love this, he formed his own team, basically so that he could play on it. It was called the Chicago Reds, and it was specifically for men who weighed less than 135 pounds. He was their player manager, and during this he also then started to branch out into acting as a booking agent for other teams, helping them organise tours around the area. And so through this he got hit up by a black basketball team that had formed first at an American Legion post, and then they were relocated to the Savoy Hotel's Jazz Ballroom, which seems a bit strange, but ballrooms in this era often doubled as basketball courts because there just weren't many purpose-built basketball courts. And this enabled hotel owners to then make some money in the daytime too, on the sort of unused dance floor. So Saperstein was called in by the manager of this team, the Savoy Big Five as they were known. He was a man called Dick Hudson, and he basically got started in getting them booked games outside of Chicago, travelling around the local area. There are a few different stories about how exactly the transition happened. Some of them don't paint Saperstein in the most, ethical light. But what eventually happened was that Saperstein ended up forming his own team, taking some of the players from the Savoy Big Five and branding them the Harlem Globetrotters. As you mentioned, they were not from Harlem. Harlem is not featured in this story. And in fact, they wouldn't play in Harlem, I think, until the 60s. But the reason that he chose that name was that in 1920s America, Harlem was synonymous with black, and specifically one of the few positive associations with black culture. It was seen as being very vibrant, colourful place, lots of Runyon-esque characters. It was cool, and it was also kind of a safety thing. He said afterwards that part of the reason he chose the name is that when they showed up in these small Midwestern all-white towns, he wanted people to know in advance that there would be black men in town so that they wouldn't get an unpleasant shock when they turned up to watch the match.
African-American athletes were still locked out of many professional leagues, and they were barred from playing in white college teams around much of the country. So that really barnstorming, this practice of travelling from town to town and putting on a show of basketball, was one of the only ways that black teams could earn money or gain visibility. But it so happened that they were kind of made up of the best players in the country. And so this team was playing basketball at a level that most people hadn't witnessed. And yes, history records that they lost on this day in history that we're recalling. But actually, even the official story of their foundation, while actually Abe Saperstein is crucial to however you tell this story, there's a lot of disputed aspects and details, including, I'm afraid, even the fact that maybe the story dates back to 1927, there is a more credible version that centres on a chap called Tommy Brookins. He was a black Chicago player who really did play for both the Giles Post-American Legion team that Rebecca mentioned and the Savoy Big Five. And disputes over money led Brookins and several of his teammates, plus their assistant coach, to break away in 1928 to form their own squad. And contemporary articles in the Chicago Defender confirm that they played under the name of the Globetrotters, actually written as two words, Globe and Trotters. And at this stage, Saperstein's role was far smaller than the official story suggests. He wasn't the founder. He was their booking agent. Brookins led the team on the court, and Saperstein arranged their tours and got a 10% cut. The thing that was meant to have pushed this team out of the Savoy Ballroom didn't actually occur in the year of 1927. In fact, the Savoy Ballroom didn't actually open until late 1927. So there's kind of a discrepancy there that supports the idea that actually it's Brookins whose story is the true one.
Okay, but I mean, regardless of the big picture stuff behind the scenes, I think remains in place, whichever story you believe, which is kind of, I guess, that Saperstein is the perfect middleman between the white management of a lot of these Midwestern arenas that they're visiting to do their show and an all-black team who see him as not one of them, but as a Jew, not quite the same as the white audiences they were playing either. Both sides would talk to him about booking the act in. And the act as it was, and this I didn't really sort of appreciate because I'm not a basketball guy. You know, if you've never seen the Harlem Globetrotters, and they still exist now, they've got a reputation as the jesters of basketball. Like, it's kind of more like a motorbike stunt show, but for basketball than it is a basketball match. So there's a lot of dribbling a ball while sliding on one knee and catching the ball on the back of your neck and bouncing it between your legs and grabbing it behind your back with pointed elbows. All of this demonstration stuff, reams they're called, which was a repertoire of stuff that was developed with that racist background. Partly, I think, to make them less threatening, perhaps to stop riots. You know, a black team come to your area and beat your white team in Hicksville, USA. One of the things that's going to keep everyone on side is, no, but look, they do all this cool stuff. Let's have fun and let's forget about the game that they've just completely thrashed you in. The sort of flip side of that is that some people see this as a kind of minstrel show, that Saperstein was sort of parading them in a way that could be considered racist or patronising as a curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, in those initial years, the Globetrotters was sort of serving two purposes, because one, it was entertainment, but also it was showing that black players were playing at an elite level. So it was representing the whole of black basketball. I mean, from our perspective now, it's hard to imagine an all-white basketball scene. Yeah. But, you know, this time, people genuinely were learning for the first time that black people could be really good at basketball, and the Globetrotters were a representation of that. And that trick-heavy sort of novelty style is credited to Inman Jackson, who played for 15 years from 1930, and he was a real showboater. There's a poster of him where he's like holding 3 basketballs over his head, and they're like, he can hold 3 basketballs. And I'm like, well, the standard of tricks was a lot lower in his earlier time. But, you know, he was credited with developing that style, because the early games, you know, while they did do tricks, that wasn't the main focus, because basketball in itself was still a novelty.
Something to be demonstrated.
Yeah, in those small Midwestern towns, you know, basketball was something that was developed at the YMCA, and it was often played in city YMCA. So if you were from a small town, you would have a basketball hoop or a basketball court in your town. You may never have seen it. And this was not traveling in style in any way. You know, traveling with a black team was extremely tough. Official and unofficial segregation, depending on what state you're in, made it incredibly hard for them to find places to stay. Certainly places where they could all stay. That was impossible. I mean, sometimes they'd be taken in by a local black family. Sometimes they slept on the floor of a random building. Sometimes it would be a local jailhouse. But often they just slept in the car. This was a Model T that Saperstein had purchased from a funeral parlour, which meant that it had window curtains, which was quite handy when they were sleeping in it. But, you know, they were getting less than $50 a fixture on average, between 6 of them. This was during the Great Depression, so it was quite hard to fill a venue. So they were rattling between these rural towns, sleeping in the car on a relentless schedule in which they sometimes played twice a day and had these long journeys in between as well. And they were wearing uniforms that Saperstein had made himself. His father was a tailor, so he had sewed those original Globetrotter vests.
With the Stars and Stripes, though, crucially, again,
Yeah.
in terms of acceptance, they are going to be patriotic. They're going to represent the best of America. And eventually they did live up to their name in terms of trotting the globe. When global tours did finally happen, they really happened. 80 countries or so, prime ministers and kings and queens have seen them, the Pope. They've played for President Khrushchev. And like all trends of the era, they had their own Hanna-Barbera Saturday morning kids TV show as well. So that's when you know you've really made it. Presumably some of the storylines interchangeable with the Jackson 5. Yeah. As long as you've got the theme tune on it, then you could just do a different story.
Jackson 5 meets Scooby-Doo meets Harlem Globetrotters. Would
exactly.
watch.
Yeah. And the Smurfs.
Yeah.
Fun fact, at 5'3", Saperstein is the shortest man in the Basketball Hall of Fame. So, how does that feel, Arion? Despite you being 8 foot tall, you still haven't made it.
I know.
Tomorrow.
Because he had this immense wealth, that kind of gave him a free pass.
Ditch the ads and get a Sunday episode when you join Club Retrospectors. Patreon.com/Retrospectors.